Hi, Ivan from Kollectiv here. Unfortunately, this episode had a lot of technical issues. First things first, the visuals were not usable for this. They were out of sync and are just overall distracting. And second, there are going to be times throughout this broadcast where it seems like somebody's talking and then someone else just either butts in or it gets cut off into another sentence. That's because a lot of our audio, unfortunately, was corrupted. So I tried my best to recover as much as possible. Overall, we had a really great conversation with Eddy Pasta, so we don't feel as if we should just toss the episode. We appreciate your guys' understanding. And lastly, unfortunately, we all got booted out of our own live towards the end of the broadcast, so you're going to hear us referring to being FBI'd, and that's just us being cheeky about TikTok's terrible recording software. Either way, we think you are going to have enough context for the entire episode to understand what we're generally talking about. And again, we appreciate your guys' patience. We appreciate you guys watching this. So thank you. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe.
Can you guys hear me if I hold it like
sure
this?
Can.
No?
Yep.
There you go.
Is my quality good?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hell
Big in the shirt. I want that shirt.
Yeah. Larry,
Sure, it's precious and you can't have it.
Okay. But it's our shirt.
that's not very calming of you.
Yeah, no, I'm all about personal and private property.
Welcome to the Capitalist Podcast. Episode 13. We're going to teach
Ivan,
you to...
sorry. Did you say you figured it out or no? Because I
We're just
love
gonna
to
leave
put
it.
it
We're
up.
going to leave it.
We're going to leave it? All right.
Mhm.
All right,
Yeah.
well then, hello, viewers. I mean, we'll see. Normally they trickle in once the conversation has, like, actually started. They're not going to stick around waiting for us to, like, start talking, so we should just, why don't we get into it?
That's okay. We usually leave some kind of treasure trove for the YouTube people
Hold
who trickle
on,
in.
I'm gonna, right before we start, I'm gonna dip slightly out of the way while
Sorry,
I
we-
do non-community,
we started, BB.
non-community warning vapor inhalants.
Oh. Take it some censored YouTube content. Here at Kollectiv, we don't condone the use of recreational substances.
Which is good, because it is purely for self-harm purposes, not
Oh
recreation.
my God.
All right.
Jesus Christ. Speaking
All right.
of self-harm,
Let's
so
not.
you-
TikTok is crazy.
wait.
No!
Cruz, why don't you tell Eddie the story you were telling us in chat about the Uber?
Yeah, let's start off with this. I love
Oh
this.
yeah, so I was driving my Uber. Right. I pick up this group of people.
You drive Uber?
I drive Uber, yeah.
Okay.
That's the only way I make my money currently. And I picked up a group of landlords.
Oh, no.
And it's
So
just
you kicked them out of the car while speeding, right?
now, in my defense, I didn't know they were landlords right away.
Oh.
It was via conversation. They're just talking and they're complaining about their work, right?
Oh, yeah. Work.
Their
Yeah,
work.
right. For
About
sure.
how the person needed a dead tree removed that was in danger of falling.
Presumably on their property.
Presumably on the property.
Right.
And it was, there's an added layer because where I am right now, we're about to get a tropical storm that's coming through. It should be happening now. And the person's like, get this tree before it comes into my house.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then that's when I learned that they were landlords and this was a tenant they were talking about. To which I then it came out that the person pays $2,500 a month for this house. I didn't mention they were military. So landlords in my area, because it's such a heavy military population, landlords really don't like, they oftentimes complain about renting to the military because they can't as easily get rid of them if you try to do something against them.
Gotcha. Yeah.
You're trying to evict our heroes?
You're trying to evict our heroes. And the last thing they said before they got out, it was her husband said, we just have to remember he's paying the next 3 years of our mortgage. So we got to do what he wants. And it's just like, how do you not hear yourself say that and not realize that you're the problem here.
Dude, well, this is what we talk about all the time, is like Americans like not understanding their role in their own society, much less like that's why it's so hard for Americans to understand the role of their government internationally. Is just like they don't even understand the harm they cause to their own community. And we could go along like whether it's because of like automotive industries like destroying the social fabric of American cities, or whether it's like all sorts of different things. But like ultimately it's like Americans uniquely lack empathy because they don't interact with people and they just see like money.
Numbers on the
For
spread.
sure. I think a lot of it has to do with just the very finding of the country. And we talked about this on one of our first episodes. You know, this country was founded in a bourgeois revolution for wealthy white landowners.
Absolutely.
To make more money. One of the main reasons why they rebelled against the English was so they could continue their genocide and partial enslavement of indigenous communities. It's all about the green. And we've had that indoctrination in us since the inception of this country. So that being said, welcome to Kollectiv Podcast, episode 13, with special guest Eddy Pasta. They're an international Marxist who studied evolutionary anthropology over at Duke. So they're way overqualified to be talking to us losers. But they're here. Right now they're doing a program for political theory and journalism at NCCU. I think I got that right. And they're here to talk to us today, all things commie, all things socialist, but in particular to talk about the greater Mediterranean area and how the United States has implemented its foreign policy in the region in its quest for imperialism. And that seems to be very near and dear to our friend because they have roots from Italy, hence the international aspect. So we're just going to have a good chat, try to be on our, a little bit of a better behavior today.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll just see how it goes. So, Eddy, what's going on?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like the first way to start off is something that I like to tell people a lot, is that the U.S. was not the monster it was internationally prior to World War II, right? Mm-hmm. But we know it was the same monster, like, domestically. And that's why we know that, like, Adolf Hitler had, like, posters of Ford in his office. We know all these things. He worshipped the American practice of segregating and oppressing, all these sorts of things. But we don't really realize that the U.S., like, segregated its oppression uniquely to be domestic. It did not step internationally outside of the occasional colony efforts in Guam or the Philippines until after the fall of Nazi Germany. And that was right because of the conflict with communism. We scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds. We've heard this saying, and it's shown time and time again to be true, because even though, like, in World War II, the main enemy was Nazi Germany, like, the U.S. and the U.K. took a lot of convincing to listen to Joseph Stalin's request for aid. But the U.S. really tested this, like, New Age imperialism on Italy prior to any other country, before they started doing Operation Condor in Latin America, before they started influencing elections. It started in Italy. And that's because Italy, I know we hear of it as, like, an Axis power, but before we even get into, like, Italy's role as, like, a modern nation, especially with fascism, because that's really important, we should probably understand what Italy is, which is a congregation of 24 different ethnic and religious and cultural groups, right? Like, we've heard about the Roman Empire and all this shit about 3000, like, BC. There's these concrete state cities, and they're based. A lot of people don't realize this, but the Italian language is not, like, a real language. It was created by academics of the Italian peninsula to blend together these 24 different languages of these 24 different regions, of different cultures, of different religions that had been completely separate. And this is less than 150 years ago. So it's very recent. It's a rise of federalism that prompts this. And it's a goal to like hold its own of a concept of Italy under Garibaldi's precepts to like retain its own national identity against the rising European industry of empire. You have people like Napoleon and whatnot, like really like dominating most of the world. And so this leads Italy to unify, but it's not a concrete country, it's not a concrete continental or national unity at all. And even to this day, that's a big part of why there's so many like conflicts. But what's so important to the U.S. is that at this time, after World War II, which Italy's role in World War II is really weird because obviously if you look at it as a national identity, it makes total sense that it's just, oh, it's on the Nazi side. But if you look at it further than that, which is that there is no national identity at this point in history, you start to see, oh, the Nazis never really pushed farther south than Rome, which was the new capital under Mussolini, right? And so then we have to start asking questions like, why did the U.S. only bomb the South? The part that was being funded by the USSR, the part that was being supported to stop the fascists. We have to start asking things like that, right? Like the U.S. only dropped one bomb in northern Italy, or north of Rome, and it was one bomb in Rome, and it's what caused the collapse of the western-facing wall of the Colosseum. So it's like the U.S. didn't do anything to stop the fascist spread in Italy. We just disrupted their supply chains. We stopped both the USSR from being able to give aid to the Southerners who were resisting it and much more likely to be Muslim, and the Northwest is much more likely to be Catholic and much more likely to be white. And because of that, we have to ask a lot of preconceptions about like what was the U.S. doing? Why did they do those things there? And sorry, I don't want to just like rant. Sorry, feel free if you guys have any questions.
No, it's really super informative. There's a lot of stuff I did not know or realize. Muerte said something similar the other day. He said that, he feels like, and I agree too, like, I feel like I have a strong sense of World War II, and then I hear more information, and I'm like, wow, that's so much more that I didn't realize. The support for outright fascism the United States has perpetuated is only worse and worse. And admittedly, I don't know too much about Italy, at least not as much as I think I do, and to hear that only one bomb was dropped in the northern white side really is, I have to process that. I really do.
Yeah, it's something a lot of people don't know.
It's on brand for the U.S., yep.
Yeah,
sure. And it's like the whole reason they gave for not bombing Rome and above was cultural heritage sites. But the one bomb they dropped was in a historically diverse neighborhood right near Trastevere, which is a historically diverse neighborhood. It means across the river. It's right near where the Colosseum is, and it's responsible for the damage that the Colosseum sustained. That's why we see now there's a lot of people think it's, we're Americans, we don't know. They're like, oh, maybe 1,000 years ago part of it fell down. It's a 2,500-year-old building. But no, it was American bombs.
Every man is about the
I had no idea.
Their lives doesn't mean they're thinking about why the part of the Colosseum is collapsed. No?
And it makes me think about, like what you were saying, how Italy was sort of this conglomeration of these national identities, and this language was created to sort of unify. It reminds me of how fascism tries. I always say, and I've said on the pod, that fascism is a false revolution. It attempts to secure power by convincing people,
and like heavily bourgeois settled area in the north would probably be one of the main reasons why they were so popular among fascists, right? Because fascism is a bourgeois ideology, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because fascists in Italy historically had no control of Rome. Rome at that time was an Arabic center of culture. There was so much culture developing as part of both the extension of the Muslim world as well as just like southern Italy concentrated in Rome. And yet at the time, the capital of Italy was Turin, which is something that Mussolini recognized needed to be fixed, which is why he pushed so hard for this like reclamation of the Roman Empire, ignoring, of course, the fact that the Roman Empire was a multipolar society, right? And if anything, I hate this concept of fascists fetishizing like the Roman Empire. We see right now there's a big meme
Right.
about like
I was
white
gonna
men,
bring
how
it up.
often they think about the Roman Empire, and it's like
Right.
the Roman Empire was a multipolar, like meritocratic class-based system, completely alien to anything that we have right now. And it's so weird that the perception of it was just as this like greater republic, and it's like, motherfucker, the republic was 1,000 years before that, and it failed tremendously because it was not integrating of foreign cultures. It's like I just don't understand. It's just classic like white man failure syndrome, like just no critical thought.
Right. Well, that's just the trend of general fascism is, again, to give people a sense of nostalgia for something that never was.
Oh yeah, and I mean, moving on to like what I was kind of getting into the U.S. involvement in Italy, is like the following World War II. We have the destruction of the Axis powers in the German Empire. They retreat northwards because they previously controlled northern Italy. I think a lot of times in America they teach it's like Germany and Italy were the enemies, but really it's the German Weimar Republic like encompassed the equivalence of the northern half of Italy up to Rome. In which case it's like, is it Italy? Is it not? Also, is Italy a thing? That's kind of something we just talked about, but something we need to realize is that like once Germany retracted its power in Italy, there was a huge power vacuum, right? And it's between two powers, the victors, the USSR and the US. In the south, Rome and below and Bologna and to the east were heavily sided in favor with the USSR. Throughout all of World War II, the USSR had been funding them in terms of munitions, food, financial support to resist the Nazi advance. That's what stopped the Germans from going farther south than Rome, was USSR support. But the US's biggest concern at this point was the USSR. The US was heavily involved, and you can look, there's a whole Wikipedia page on CIA activity in Italy, and it covers specifically 1948 to like 1960, where we have well-documented evidence of American, specifically CIA-targeted funding into one of the two major parties at that time. So there's two major parties in Italy at this time, post-World War II. There's the Democratic Christians, or the Christian Democrats, depending on how you translate, and then there's the Italian Communist Party. The Italian Communist Party was heavily tied to the USSR at this point, and so the US's biggest fear was that Italy, which was popularly in favor of Marxism because they saw how the partigiani, the resistance fighters, held off Nazis. You know, there's a song, Bella Ciao, O Partigiano, right? That means, oh, freedom fighter. It's an entire song about freedom fighters finding a spot to lay down their life to hold back fascists from advancing southwards. That's what the song is about. So Italy has a long Marxist tradition, and because of that, America, post-World War II, was heavily invested in stopping it. Because for one, Italy is like the centerpiece of the Mediterranean. It is, and has been historically, the bridge between Asia, Africa, and Europe. America, and specifically NATO, post-World War II, really needed a crown to bridge between Africa and Asia. Specifically, you have to think about like Asia at this point, the US had the fear of China and the USSR. In Africa, there was Libya, literally 20 miles across the sea from the southern point of Sicily, where Gaddafi was in power. There were southern Italians in favor of both Gaddafi and sorry, this is later down the line. I did a bit of a time skip there. But,
No, you're good. You're good.
Just historically, the Mediterranean has been really important for NATO, and they've never had a good access point to it. The only access point for a long time was Italy. We see now they got Turkey, which is why they don't care so much about Italy, which is why Italy's getting more and more fascist, and we can get into that later. Sorry, I don't have a direct direction to go on, but I'm just kind of rambling.
It's all
but
good.
yeah, feel free if you guys have any points or questions to hop in. But like well before the U.S. was enacting Operation Condor in like Latin America, it was investing money in the Christian the Democratic Christian Party, which in Italy was the right-wing or conservative party after the Nazis were banned, after the Nazis were lost and everything. And most importantly, it's the party that had the funding from the Vatican Party, from the Vatican City, like, federal funds, which prior to World War II, the Vatican City federal funds were, of course, going to the German Nazis.
Yep.
A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't like to admit that if they do know it, but it is true. Hate to tell you, the Catholic Church funded the Nazis, right?
Well, actually, just to butt in for just a second, there is a picture of the Pope at the time meeting with Nazi officials, and I believe a picture of him meeting with Adolf Hitler.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, he was
It's got like the Vatican flag.
So actually, if we go on a little bit of a tangent, a big reason why now we have the Vatican. If you've ever been to Vatican City, or if any of the viewers have been, you'll see at the Vatican in Rome there is these guys in this horrendous orange uniform, and it's called the Swiss Guard. The Swiss Guard is there because the Vatican created a defense agreement with the government of Switzerland during their neutrality to not get involved militarily against the Nazis, because they both were in economic support of the Nazis. So the reason the Swiss Guard supports the Vatican City is because they're like, yeah, we're both on the right side of history. It's literally like a bro code of supporting Nazism. It's crazy.
Crazy cringe. A couple points I want to make. Yeah, I've been talking to some of the boys in the chat, and I haven't really said this out loud, but like, I my entire life I've been vaguely religious and was baptized a Catholic, and lately I've been really like steered away from it because it finally, in the process of decolonization, I've come to full terms that like not only was the Catholic Church doing terrible things during the initial, cannot reconcile those two concepts, that you could preach something Christ-like, but then support the most evil regime in the world. And to touch on that as well, bringing up Bella Ciao, when I listen to that kind of music, or like music from like Daniel Kahn, if you're familiar, or IRA music, it really paints like a real picture of how things were in that time period, how the what we call now the third world, not America, not England, saw the Nazi threat, especially the USSR, that it really was an existential extinction level event, essentially. And here in the United States, we were just playing whatever side would give us the advantage, or whatever side that we really agreed with. And ultimately, even though we had a lot of our guns pointed at the Nazi regime, we didn't have all of them, because we were actively supporting them financially and materially in a lot of ways. And it makes me think about today, when we see former colonized countries, especially in Africa, like in former Burkina Faso, or Gabon, or Niger, or even Mexico the other day, when they are now flying, even though capitalist flags like Russia, people who maybe are not as well politically versed wonder, why are they doing that? And it's because the rest of the world doesn't see history in the sense of like, okay, the Nazis are gone and now everything's fine. It's the Nazis are gone and now it's the Americans who are the existential threat.
Yeah, no, this is huge. An important thing in terms of Italy, especially because we're gonna get into modern Italy with electing literally an outright fascist endorsed by the granddaughter and the niece of Mussolini, Giorgia Meloni, is that it is so important to recognize that liberals on the international scale, when they come from the West, will always side with fascists over communists. The concern of America in the time of Italy after World War II was that they would start siding with the Middle East and with USSR. Because culturally, they had always been more on that side of the world, and the US realized that the rest of Europe had not helped them. And so their concern was that. So they started putting a bunch of money into the Vatican-supported parties, the right-wing parties, so that they could win elections, because that was their concern. It's why we say you scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds. They will always side with a fascist over a communist. And you need to ask, why? It's because we're attacking the framework they're comfortable with because of the position they've been blessed with, right? They don't understand that their position could be at threat because they aren't in that position. And that type of stuff is why, like, especially as an Italian, like, my grandparents met each other as partigiani, freedom fighters, like communists funded by USSR, like arms dealers against
So you've just been
fascists.
based in your whole family.
Yeah, my dad was like part of like anarchist militia like when he was like a teenager. So this is like in my family, and it's why it's so fucking infuriating when like Westerners hit you with the communism, Nazism. It's the same thing, and it's like I've gone on lives and I've talked about this, and then people will go, oh, so you know Romania, or they'll like sort these quote countries where communism failed, and it's like I've been to these places. The people living there that were alive during communism literally prefer when they had a centrally planned economy, because they weren't susceptible to dips and valleys or crashes or economic boom and bust cycles that are determined by a market where everyone's forced to overproduce. And it's just like so infuriating, because it's like we talk a lot about like privilege in terms of like the social intersectional scale, and it's all super valid, and then we ignore the fact that at a global scale Americans are just the most like brain dead, lack class consciousness, like lacking class consciousness people. There really can be like, and I mean specifically like white Americans who like have no cultural acceptance.
I think
what I mean when I say American.
They have very much a class identity. I just think that it's Americans, especially white Americans, it's just a petty bourgeoisie class identity. Even if they aren't materially part of that class, that's where they see themselves at, because of the intersection of their caste and their class, where they're sort of labor aristocracy. Even if they don't own any property, they still tend to have higher wages, and they're very privileged. It gives them this petty bourgeois mindset where they don't see class in the way that most of the people around the world do. That's been my observation over the years, as after becoming a Marxist and starting to understand this stuff. That's been my particular area of study, is that why aren't more people that look like me able to get this stuff? And that's
I think like liberals like inherently have a different understanding of what freedom is. Like I think that usually like we see freedom as like, you know, freedom from death, freedom from suffering, like, you know, like the freedom to like not have to die because you don't have enough money for healthcare. And like liberals see freedom as like, I have the freedom to buy a yacht. I have the freedom to do this. I have the freedom to oppress this person. I have the freedom to buy that. You know what I mean? Like
corporate liberties over individual freedoms, right?
Yeah.
The corporate ability to do something at the expense of an individual, because the capital is what determines autonomy. And that's like the biggest, that's why like freedom as a whole is such an arbitrary concept depending on like the class structure you live in. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100% there.
Right.
And like specifically with Romania, like when you brought up Romania, like it's such a perfect example that I love that you brought it up, because like they talk about how capitalism is like so much better, but you literally have to all you have to do is look at their own example, Romania, and see that they're like economically like held hostage by the European Union, and that their population is being like sapped from them like a vampire sucking on them, like taking their people, because these people are like literally living in abject poverty because they don't have health care, they don't have like proper public housing, like all these things that they had before that, like, you know, objectively made their lives better is just gone. So like there's just a mass exodus of people.
I'm sorry. I have a comrade from Romania who's now in the States, and like just to watch them kind of go from the 90s, where it's like we're happy to have freedom and everything, and then the reality of it as capitalism developed pretty quickly. It went from, you know, that like they still hate Ceausescu, but not nearly as much as they hate the reality of today is pretty much.
I mean, I always, and this is something like I need to hit. It's generally Americans that like don't understand. It hasn't properly cemented in their minds just how bad the material conditions of their own lives are, despite how wealthy the country they live in is. This is something like Americans don't realize that despite countries with fractions of the annual wages, they don't have stats like 60% being one medical emergency away from being homeless. Because like the average American has less than 500 in their savings. Like if you look at
Right.
home ownership rates, I'm not even going to get into like homelessness or like how many people are unhoused, which is already a huge parameter from like prior Marxist legacy to now. Just home ownership, countries like Romania, which capitalists love to regale as this communist failure, like they still have over 85% home ownership rate. You know what it is in like most capitalist countries that never had any centrally planned system? Under 5%. That's insane. Like it goes from 85 minimum to 5% home ownership rate. That alone says so much about economic ability, right? Because like what is economics other than an arbitrary metric by which we measure like productivity? And of course we get it. What is productivity? Is it the value of labor? Is it the value of excess value gained from a certain amount of labor? Regardless, if the people in your country don't have houses, how productive can you be?
Right.
Like, it's
Right.
that simple. And it's like, I hate the fucking arbitrary metrics of like, oh, on paper, our GDP is up this amount. Or like, it's the same thing that China's going to fail because it's following the arbitrary metrics of capitalist bourgeoisie economic values, which are based, like the entire trends are based on maximizing profits.
Right.
So if a country has a government model that prints money economically on a basis that is not to maximize profit, that system is not going to work in analyzing it. So, of course,
Right.
everyone in America is like, China's going to fail any minute. China's going to fail any minute. Motherfucker, China has different priorities, and it isn't going to default because
Right.
it's not reliant on private investment loans.
And they've been
Like,
saying
yeah.
that China's going to fail for
I mean,
decades
some of
now.
my
And
Eventually, the U.S. is just going to run out of ammo to say China's going to fail. They're just going to
Right.
invade. China was going to nuke Taiwan, so we're invading because they ran
Yeah.
out of excuses to
Right.
justify it.
something like that. But you know,
They've been saying that for 20 years since I've been an adult.
it makes me think, you know, when you were talking about how these countries, even though they're, you know, poor countries, or as we say, overexploited countries, even though these countries, their GDPs or whatever capitalist measurement we're using is so much smaller, these countries still at least try to provide the most basic necessities to its people. So you were saying how Americans, particularly white Americans here, don't realize the position of privilege that they have. Yeah, so I'm first gen. I was telling you in chat, you know, from Guatemala. My parents were refugees from the 1950s and 60s Civil War. So my even though Guatemala is a poor, corrupt U.S. puppet country and had an attempted communist uprising, and that was not successful. On paper, in the Constitution, they still guarantee healthcare. And it's hard for people to get healthcare because the hospitals are understaffed and underfunded and da-da-da. But if you can get your way into a clinic, for the most part, unless there's a shortage, they will give you what you need. And I think this difference in our mentality comes from, again, where did we come from? The American Revolution was led by the rich, the bourgeois, where they were never concerned about housing or Medicare or anything like that, as opposed to colonized people, whether it was up in, you know, in places like Ireland or Palestine or Africa or Latin America, where, okay, you get a bunch of random people together and say, we need a house, we need water, we need medicine, and food. That's like the basic stuff. And it's intrinsic into their cultures. We don't have that here. So instead, you got a bunch of Americans who think that, like you were saying, their freedom is to buy 20 different flavors of bagel, as opposed to how many people I know who don't support socialism, who are one leg break away from complete financial ruin.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's so important to understand that, like, the U.S.'s priority, at least governmentally, has been to encourage the ruin that Americans are this close to is not coincidental. It is intentional because the American proletariat has never once stood up and shook their fist at the man, right? They've just been like, yeah, okay, we're richer than other countries. Sure, oppress us, but at least we can buy commodities, right? And so because of that, we don't even understand that the fact that, like, our country's whole role in other countries, and we look at Italy, because I always say Italy was the blueprint for what they did in all of Latin America and the rest of the world, is like, Italy, despite its communist history, its Marxist funding that allowed it to survive the Nazi onslaught. Despite that, not a single leftist coalition won an election until 1998. Because until 94, the CIA was pumping money into fundamentalist Christian parties. That is an insane thing, but people don't realize, if you try to tell Americans about this shit, they say, it's just the game of politics, everyone's doing this. No, not everyone's doing this. The U.S. is doing this. The USSR had the KGB as a direct response to the existence of the CIA, which invented the missile gap, caused the Cuban Missile Crisis by first placing nukes in Turkey. All these things that Americans just have no idea about, because there's a very clear reason that the exact time the U.S. started pushing international imperialism and psychological warfare, that we dropped in educational quality from the first in the world to the 26th, when at the time there were only 24 developed countries. Now there's 35, we're 32nd. This is very clear. The more intelligent and educated your people are, the more they're likely to be like, wait, why the fuck are we doing that in Afghanistan or Iran or Vietnam or in Cuba or Taiwan or anything? No other country on earth has spent 93% of its existence at war and none of it on its own territory. You can think of attacks like Pearl Harbor. Hawaii was a military base. It was not a state yet.
Yeah.
These weren't attacks on American soil. These were looking for excuses to target international warfare. The reason Japan targeted Hawaii in the first place was because America had destroyers there, right? They're like, shit, we don't want them to attack us. It's the reason we didn't nuke Tokyo is because we had already destroyed all of Tokyo by fire bombings. We had already destroyed the capital by fire bombings before we dropped a nuke. We did it because we had an excuse to, and we wanted to see the damage it would do. No other country has dropped nukes. No other country would consider it. It's the U.S. is so comically evil, and no one is willing to understand just how much worse it is than anything else.
There's nothing more frustrating than calling it out and talking about this stuff to people. So one of the frustrations for me in talking about this stuff, and these guys all know, I live next to the NATO headquarters. I'm surrounded by these people that do this shit. And I'll say it to them, I'll say it to their friends, their families, and half of them are somehow still oblivious to all of it. They're just like, no, if it's happening, it's probably because we have to, right? And that's just how it is.
No, I mean,
or you call it out, and it's like, oh, Afghanistan, my uncle's there. My uncle was there, and he was a contractor, and it's like, okay,
relative, I'll say it like that. Did counterintelligence for a private company, and I'm like, oh, he was doing the really bad shit. I mean, he's a whole. That's a whole other conversation we could have. Yeah, no, you were saying the U.S. really is comically evil, and it takes so much effort to get people to fully conceptualize that. So, when you were growing up, right? You were saying how you've already had this in your bloodline. So were you always this based, or did you go through a liberal phase, or what's your origins?
So I first started getting into politics I heard people all around me debating it, and I was like, I went in on the debate, but I don't know what I believe. So I just started obsessively and compulsively, if you will, consuming absolutely anything and everything I can. And the very first thing I started, because I think I was a contrarian by nature, was like anarchy, right? Especially as an Italian, and my dad was like an anarchist, a militant, and whatnot. So like easy texts that were available to me were like Malatesta and Voltaire. So immediately I started on the anarchy pipeline. But of course, like that's natural because it's like an inherently like more naive ideology that lacks like any solutions. So I was young. But I started to realize, like, why is it that the U.S. government cracked so hard on Marxists and didn't give a shit about anarchists? Why were the Black Panthers Marxist-Leninists and not anarchists? And all these things. And especially starting to see, like, right now in Italy as well, like, a lot of the lasting left-wing organizations were anarchist ones. And the Marxist-Leninist ones got killed from inside plants. So that alone is like a huge indicator that, maybe one is fruitless and one is threatening to capital. So that was probably like the biggest, just like kind of observing things around me as I read more and more. But of course, like as an Italian, obviously I have a huge preference towards Michael Parenti. I think he's a great writer, as well as just great discussion on theory. But other reads
Antonio
that I think
Gramsci.
were like great on like putting me, Gramsci is great, both for hegemon as well as just internationalism as a concept. But also, like, for me, a really big read recently that I'm always recommending to people is, like, the Jakarta method for just showing how
Yeah,
evil
that's a
the
really good
U.S.
book.
is. And then, I'm a big Lenin head. I'm a big simp for Lenin. So I'm always like,
Big-
what is to be done? State and Revolution. Those are great reads.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
But,
Yeah, we all have different origin stories here, but yeah, for the most part, it all came about just being exposed to the truth. I hate to sound so corny, but that's really fundamentally what it
yeah,
comes
I
down
mean,
to.
it's if you live in the West, it's annoyingly difficult to do. But
Yes.
I think I was a little bit more privileged in growing up in connection with also the Arab world, so I was constantly exposed to like I didn't grow up thinking of Stalin or Mao as these evil caricatures.
Right.
The way that I think a lot of people, even with good intentions or from progressive families in America, do. Like, especially Stalin and Gaddafi were two people who I grew up seeing as like, there's no way about it. They improved the lives for everyone in their country. You know what I mean? And it's so weird. Like, for me, like, in America, the more I start reading these things, I'm like, what? I've never heard about this. I start looking at it, and it's like, oh, that's because it's a lie that was spread. But, like, if that's your, like, I always say it takes, like, 10 sentences to deconstruct one sentence of lies someone believes.
For sure.
Right.
For sure.
Like, I feel this all the time on TikTok. I see something that's objectively untrue. How am I supposed to, like, deconstruct that in 15 seconds just because he lied in one take? Right? It takes so many more sentences to deconstruct every lie that is a sentence.
Right, and when you do that, you'll find that people react emotionally because you are challenging their whole conceptions of the world. And you find a lot of that, for example, with the when you talk about the Russian-Ukraine conflict. If you add any kind of nuance to the situation instead of Putin bad, which yes, Putin bad, but there's a lot more to it. People get really upset, and they get really upset because it's really like an animalistic reaction because they don't know what to do.
I'm going to be real. Like, the absolute worst part of this whole Russia-Ukraine thing happened, like, in the past few weeks. And it's reactionary conservatives all of a sudden being, like, super anti-funding going to Ukraine. Because I'm like, yes, wait, no, wait, hold on, you like Trump, what the fuck?
Right.
Just like, I'm like, no, this is so confusing to my political identity.
I just saw a headline which was like, Poland is no longer selling weapons to Ukraine, and I'm like, based, but then I'm like, wait a minute, Poland's super far right, so I'm like,
no, it's because they're like
broken clock thing,
They're cut out of the grain deal, and they're pissed off. So, yeah, it's funny that Poland and Hungary, the two, furthest right Eastern European countries, are sort of the least supportive of their brethren in Ukraine who are also extremely far right. A little strange.
Well, I think
Right.
that Poland is a little bit, because they're so far right, and because Western Ukraine, the most nationalist part of Ukraine, was once a part of Poland. They low key kind of want to be like, well, we'll help them fight the Russians because we don't like the Russians. We hate those guys. But if Ukraine happened to lose the war,
There's a
of
long history of beef there.
Yeah, and a lot of like the European conflicts in the last 100 years are based on like where the lines of default whiteness are drawn. And since the EU and NATO are default like arbiters of the far right ideology, meaning they get to decide what the right considers white. That's why like when the Ukraine war was happening, we saw like American media representatives saying like, we're not used to this happening to white people in Europe. And it's like, motherfuckers, like, what happened when Ukraine and Poland were getting invaded both by the Russians and by the Germans? They weren't white then, right? And it's like, it's I think a similar thing is like with Italy, right? Like in the 1890s, like Italian immigrants were seen as like the worst people ever. And then like now they're white and they better be fascist. It's just like the whole thing is like also like Italian as a like it goes back into just the entire like arbiters of whiteness and how stupid race is and like
race science is lame.
It really is like because if you look at Italy, it's like the top half is super white, the bottom half is super brown, and then the racist people, which there are plenty of them, love like pointing at like the economic productivity drawn across the same lines, and they're like, therefore the brown people are worse. And it's like, motherfucker, no, it's because of that racial disparity that the economic disparity exists. Like racism enacts
U.S.
power.
imperialism.
Yeah, and they just like they don't understand how the U.S. would have possibly controlled that. And it's like, bro, what country was the last like major power to abolish slavery? Because like most people don't realize that the UK had abolished slavery in the mainland of the British Isles before the American Revolution happened. A lot of historians think that was part of the reason the revolution happened. Was because they were worried they would lose the ability to have slaves.
Yeah, exactly. Very rare British W.
Maybe the only one, also.
Maybe
the only
well, they had Irish indentured servants, so they didn't need slaves.
Irish weren't people back then.
No, but
still a British L. Fuck you guys.
Hey, as a proud Roman, I believe the Brits and the Anglos are not human.
I can get behind that. No, I'm playing. That's gonna end up on the soundboard. But
all right, someone clip that.
There's a famous like Caesar quote when he's doing his expedition of the Gallic Isles, where he's like, "These people are the most backwards, subhuman garbage I've ever seen." He's like, "They wash themselves with rocks and bark." He's talking about like the British, like in like 100 BC. It's so funny, though, how, like, Africa, Arabia, Asia, Latin America had complex cities and societies, and then everything north of Italy was just, like, fucking barbarians. And yet they're the pinnacle of evolution. They're the societal peak.
I mean, that's just racism and fascism. It's projection. But to get a little bit, to get a little bit back on track, like, I say that, I know, I forgot what I was going to say. With whiteness, whiteness is a characteristic. It is a characteristic assigned by the bourgeois class who see themselves as different, so they assigned whiteness to it instead of recognizing real national identity, like the kingdoms of Italy, or like for myself, when in Latin America it gets pretty spicy too with the racism, unfortunately, but like. Nationality, I'm from Guatemala, but ethnically, I'm indigenous. I got a little bit of Mexican, Guatemalan, Belize, Central and South America, whatever. It's just a hodgepodge, right? But unfortunately, this concept of whiteness still spread all around the world. So you'll go to these countries, like in Guatemala, and you'll have people who look like me, who were, I would say, the majority of people there. But then you'll have the white Spanish and French, Dutch people living there who have, maybe one generation of kids, so they're like 6 feet tall and we're like 4 foot nothing. And then you have like these beauty standards of like, well, you can't be with those Indos, and it's like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, it's a completely made up concept.
Bro, I don't, unrelated, but also like tangent off of what you just said. I don't know if it's like having access to the American diet. My dad is 5'3", my mom's 5'2", and I came out 6'1", but I don't know if it's just because by the age of 7, I was like eating American food, but like, I'm also like super white. Like, so anytime I'm with my extended family, I'm towering above them and way paler than all of them. So like my whole childhood has been always really weird.
So that's when you have like the thoughts going in of like, I could be better than all of them.
Get off my land, you
too,
glass
but
stealing
also,
bastard.
yeah, one, I was like, okay, what the fuck? Why did we go through with the land reforms? And then two, I was like, I'm better than you. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you know what? I just take the Vietnamese say, you know what? The Americans are just bigger targets. So
Yeah, no, I'm a huge target. That's okay. I'll take it.
Yeah,
I'll soak up the bullets for my small Apenninian Muslim comrades.
yeah.
My
I
Southern Italian
Inshallah.
comrades. Yeah,
check-
for real.
check this out.
Inshallah.
It's like, hey, Allah made me bigger than you guys for a reason. I'll soak up the front line.
there you go.
I have like the size of a bear with none of the speed or strength, so I'm just literally a big target.
No, I'm the same way. It's okay.
That's great. That's funny.
I'm
I'm surprisingly fast, and I think that's from the running away from the colonizers.
I'm fast for a human, but like I said, size of a bear without the strength and speed. Like,
You know what it is?
It's not be this big. I don't need this size.
You know what it is? It's because I'm 5'4" and I'm overweight. So, and I'm a mountain person from Guatemala. So all my muscles are just like in my legs. So I can just like take off and run from the colonizers like way faster before they even notice. But
That's why you guys are so good at football.
Hell yeah. It's all that power, bro. Power bottom.
Hey, notice how I didn't say soccer either.
Because
I
you're
would
based
have
on
said
it.
cultural. But yeah.
Time to get racist.
Hey, it's not racist. It's just discriminatory. We're white. It's okay, guys.
That's
We've been
true.
accepted by America as white now.
Oh my god. So
Right, that's so crazy actually, because you guys, when I think of Italian, I think white, and then a lot of Italians don't consider themselves white.
Yeah, well, no. So Italian Americans, by and large, are all white. They're like 90% from like Naples and above. There's a lot of Italians in Italy who are not white. Like my dad is biracial. And it's because for thousands of years, Italy was the bridge between Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. So if you go Rome and below, or from Bologna into the east, the average person is not white. It's just that part of the country is 30% of the country. And the north is where all the dense parts is, and that's super white. And that's why like fascism was so big in Italy specifically. It's because it's such a geographically and ethnically divided country. Does that make sense? So it's like, because of this, like, and it's part of what I was saying earlier, like, it's not a national identity. There is no nation of Italy or cultural Italian concept. That doesn't exist outside of people who immigrated from there and are white in another country and want to claim a culture that they don't have. Like Americans in New York who are like, I'm Italian. Mozzarella or whatever.
They don't say the words properly, like shorten it,
Dude, it's
So
just
what
like,
you're saying is it's okay to be racist to New York Italian.
Oh, absolutely. I'm racist to them all the time. Yeah, absolutely. It's not even racist.
I'm not
It's just
Italian. I'm
making fun of
Etruscan,
crackers.
guys.
Yeah, no, see, that's the thing. It's like, if you're actually Italian, you wouldn't identify as Italian. You'd identify as the region you're from or the culture you're from, because there's a extremely, like, some of them are super Arabic, some of them are super, like, Moorish, some are, like, directly resulted to, like, Libyan, Tunisian, and Egyptian. Others are Greek. Others are like there's so many.
Sicily's
like,
a good example too, right? Because Sicily is really...
exactly.
Yeah, Sicily is crazy.
Yeah, it was part of the
Like
kingdoms
how-
of Spain. It was part of the Moorish influence. It was under Carthage, Tunisia. Like
The Sicilian language has like influences from Arabic, English, French, just about like
so
any
that's
English.
like the Italian language is like less than 150 years old. every region has its own language. So the
It's
average
called
Italian
standard
speaks.
Italian, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the average
Yeah.
Italian speaks 3 to 4 languages. So like I speak Napolitan, Sardinian, Roman, and Calabrian, and Sicilian.
Well,
And that's because like I'm a southerner, so I grew up in Rome, so which is like the metropolis of Italy. It's like the biggest city, and it's in the south, so there's a lot of like Arabic influence. But it's like that's not like Italian. If you're an American, right, and you learn Italian, you go to Italy, unless you speak to an educated adult who like went to school properly, that might not even help you, because like the average person who's not super educated might not even know proper standard Italian, right? Because they didn't go to higher education. They just know the language in the neighborhood they grew up in.
So I have a question about talking, and I know some bit of Italian history, but like as far as the North being dominant, how much did that have to do with the development of the bourgeois classes in like Genoa and Venice? Genoa and Venice were the two major trade centers, correct? So
Yeah, so
would that have
absolutely,
been where
yeah.
the
So
bourgeois really developed soonest and most successfully, I guess?
yeah, so historically there were four major centers of like trade and development through the Renaissance. And it's Genoa, Venice, Bologna, and Rome. Rome being part of the Papal States, which includes the Vatican and whatnot. Bologna was like the peak of Arabic center in Europe.
Right.
Then there's Venice, which is huge Turkish, Greek influence, and then Genoa, which is huge Francophone, English, Germanic. This as a whole didn't determine the bourgeois policies as a whole, because with the dissolution of a lot of monarchies and the rise of the aristocratic groups, there was heavy land reforms in every single one of those major city-states except for Venice and Genoa, which is why right now those two along with Milan with the Industrial Revolution, Milan joined the three as a major economic power. Those three are the centers of like fascism in Italy right now, is Milan, Genoa, and Venice. Now, if you go to places like Bologna, Rome, or even like farther south, or even to the far east, Trieste, which used to be part of Yugoslavia actually, because it's right on the border with like Croatia, Slovenia, and Italy. Like these are cities with huge communist and Marxist traditions. Like you walk around downtown, there's hammers and sickles graffitis everywhere. Compared to places like Genoa or Milan, where there's fascist iconography as graffiti. And it's like a huge difference. And this is why I think like there's almost like weird similarities between Italy and America in terms of just like how starkly divided it is. But in America, it's like this violent schism between center-right imperialists and far-right fascists. In Italy, it's this schism between like people who don't give a shit about any politics whatsoever, fascists and communists.
Right.
So it's like a more extreme version of America, but it makes sense because somewhere else, because that was the Mediterranean was the one thing they did not want the Marxist world to have control of, because then it would mean it was a free highway of commerce and traffic for all of Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. And so like Italy was the huge focus for America. And that's kind of why it's like to this day so so problematic. Like there was a leader, Berlusconi. I don't know if you guys know that name. For a long time, he was a northerner from Milan. He was involved in Italian politics, one of the most corrupt politicians in the world. He got a lot of money from the mafia. The reason the mafia gained that protected status to donate money without being tracked was because from the 40s to the 60s, the CIA's main source of contact was the mafia. In fact, like things in Libya later on, or like abductions of like quote-unquote Islamic terrorists, meaning just Muslim world like political leaders post 9/11, were done using the mafia, like the Italian mafia. And the reason why Italy had such a hard time prosecuting them was, one, because the protections secured by Berlusconi, who was put in power with mafia money. But the mafia money was gained through CIA influence, because the mafia's main role post the Nazis left post-Nazis leaving Italy, because originally the mafia was actually opposed to the Nazis. Once the Nazis were no longer a part of it, the mafia signed with the next biggest budget contractor that didn't defeat their values. And that was America, because America doesn't have values. They just care about like money being printed. Right. So at that point, the Nazis allied with America and started shutting down the communists, especially because the mafia were more traditionally conservative family values and Catholic. So it was really easy for them to side with the democratic Christians rather than the Italian Communist Party.
Right.
Which
and their class interest was very much petty bourgeoisie.
Yeah. The mafia, they would love to consider themselves bourgeoisie. They're just outside of the law.
I was going to say about Berlusconi was one of my early insights into how bankrupt Western liberals were. They were talking about one of Berlusconi's scandals when I was younger, when I was around, when he was there. And I remember the liberal pundit of the time was just sort of, it might have been Bill Maher. Super cringe. But he was like, oh, yes, they have, scandals over there and nobody cares about their personal scandals. It's just whether they get shit done. And it's like...
Dude, okay, sorry. Yeah, no, I hear that all the time about Americans. Yeah. Like, Americans always saying, like, this happens all the... It's like, people don't know this, but, like, Berlusconi almost died at a press conference because somebody prior to the press conference found the hotel room he was hiding, like, living in, like went in, stole like a award he had been given, waited until the press conference and threw it from the audience into his face and like cracked his occipital bone. Like Italians hated Berlusconi. The only reason he kept winning was because of the mafia. But this is like Americans like convincing us we take like politics too seriously or too emotionally. Right. Like you remember like when Trump won, the narrative of like liberals getting so upset that Hillary lost and all the cry cams. And it's like, yeah, because we're in America, the best you can do is cry about it. If we were in Italy and it were that like ridiculous, if the Electoral College to the degree that it existed in America existed in the Italian South, every single seated member of parliament would have a bullet in their head by tomorrow. Like, they would be like, you're telling me we would vote 60% and not even be close to winning? You know, like, but these are the people that literally, like, sided with the Soviets despite, like, ideologically hating the Soviets because the Soviets were anti the Vatican, and these are, like, deeply impoverished, deeply reverent Catholic people. But they're still, more than anything, pro-community. And, like, it's just a different culture that I swear America feels like, it feels like in America everybody thinks they have a better sense of the political understanding of the world when they have the smallest understanding because they have the least to lose or the least to gain because our politics means so little for our living material.
I'm back.
Bro, we got FBI.
The FBI's took us down, guys. The CIA'd us.
I heard you talking about all that CIA stuff in Italy, and they were like, no. Okay, hold on. People are starting to actually pay attention.
I'm telling you, it's not a coincidence. But
they're like, Italy, no one cares about that. Oh, wait, they're listening.
Yeah. We'll just edit it through on the YouTube. It's fine. But just see if Larry is.
Oh wait, somebody just left and went offline.
I don't know. I don't know what happened. We're probably getting throttled 100%. I'm not even joking.
This happens like sometimes throughout our podcasts, especially on TikTok.
No, it's all good. I mean, ever since the ByteDance acquisition, I get so many like actual Nazis on my TikTok posts and whatnot. Like I have people like being like, "Oh, your eyes are black, therefore we can tell you're not white." It's shit like that. It's like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Right.
Do they always call you Jewish?
No, actually, I think sometimes, I think a lot of times people can just tell that I'm just like. I don't know. It's like Nazis are the only people that would believe me if I said I was slightly mixed. I swear. Like, but I don't know. It's just weird stuff. But yeah, I haven't gone live on TikTok in a while because it's like inevitably you get some like Christian nationalist with like a fucking shield of arms as their profile picture, and then they play dumb, being like, "Oh, what do you think of this? Oh, what do you mean? I'm just asking questions." But they're clearly like dog whistle questions.
Right.
But
Let's see if the two boys will get back. So QD requested. So see if is there anything on your end.
let's
See
see.
this.
CIA snuffed.
All right. Larry's
Well,
back. QD's back. All right. We got FBI,
Hey,
bro.
I'm back. Not today,
Anyway,
CIA. Not
what I
today.
was what I was going to say before we got CIA, maybe they'll knock on my door now. Is
Yeah. Maybe you shouldn't say it.
no, fuck it, I'm gonna
Say
say
it.
it.
Reagan should have died to the shots of John Hinckley.
Oh my god.
Based.
You're gonna have to, I don't know, we might have to censor that for YouTube. But
I like.
what the hell was I gonna say? Oh, the Italian mafia connected to New York and New Jersey. Um, they ran security and ran the casinos and brothels in Havana. In the Batista regime.
Oh yeah, no, Batista was big on working with the fascists, not just the American ones, but the Italian ones as well. I mean, that was a huge thing. Like a lot of people don't realize that 90% of the Cuban economy was privately owned sugarcane industry by two organizations, Americans and the Italian mafia. Like 90% of the publicly traded economy of Cuba, which, by the way, since the revolution, they don't have a publicly traded economy because of the blockade. That means to this day, the most money they've ever made was when the mafia and like American landowners were ripping them off. They still haven't made more money than that from trades because of the blockade. It's so fucked. And yet they still have like vaccines for lung cancer and they're not allowed to trade them to other countries because of the blockade.
Right.
It's just sickening. I don't know how you can do
Right,
that.
and they also can't get access because they have a lot of like technology from America, and they need like parts from America, and they can't get those parts either because America won't. They won't trade with them.
Yeah, no, during COVID, Italy and Cuba were working together a lot during COVID, and it was Cuban medicine that saved Italy. It was not American aid, it was nothing like that. It was Cuban medicine, and it was Italian money that helped fund Cuban medicine to deal with their own outbreaks. Like, and that alone cost cost Italy American tariffs. And that's partially what led to Maloney getting elected was a lot of ignorant conservatives just saying, why am I getting taxed extra? Not understanding that it's because of the U.S. and being like, oh, it's because of like communism. Therefore, we're going to vote for a fascist, right? And it's because, once again, lack of education. It's the same reason like whenever countries start getting more imperialist, they start investing less in public education. You don't want your people to organize against you right? Because if people are educated, they're going to have more morals. They're going to be like, why are we invading these countries when we're already wealthier? Why are we making them suffer for minimal costs for us if it's only benefiting corporations? That's why like the U.S. had to lower their education, why Italy did the same, and why Western Europe's education is getting worse. And like, it's
And
just
we're really making the push now. You see it really big from the Republicans specifically. These charter schools, they want all schools to be private. They want basically
they want no public funding. I mean,
no public funding for education.
I give it another like 3 years before the Republican Party platform as a whole for the Republican Party is to eradicate the Board of Education, because right now every popular candidate uses that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, they were just burning books in Florida, so I mean.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the term privatization came from Hitler.
Yeah.
So
they want that. They want, and it's just the natural development of capitalism. The U.S. just unfortunately is the most advanced. Like this kind of crap is going to be coming to other countries too. They don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the first country to do it. That at least with the most international capital is going to control the pace at which others can do it, right?
Yeah.
That was the whole point. Like, it's so ironic that Nazi Germany based their entire platform off of the U.S. subjugation of black people and native people. Yep. And then once Nazi Germany was felled by the USSR, America loves to take credit, but the USSR took Berlin before America ever stepped a single troop inside the German border.
Yeah.
It was the USSR that took it down. And then even then, it's like we're convinced, one, they're equally evil, but also that like the USSR had their own reasons for doing that. We were doing it for the good of humanity. And then it's like, but it's so like critically ignorant of the entire historical role of the U.S. And it's like the USSR only got involved in places to bring them good things or to counteract the role of the U.S. on the like the prevalence of corporate interests. It's just insane that like you say this stuff and people look at you like you're crazy just because of how little the basic education is here.
Yeah.
I've been told I sound like a conspiracy theorist half the time, and it'll be like, this is from the CIA's website. Like, it's from them. I don't know what to tell you.
No, it's like that's the worst part of it all, honestly, is that the most damning evidence we can ever gather on the CIA is the stuff released by them, because it's the only stuff you can say, look, they admitted this, and it's something people can't refute. But there's so much more that's like academically sourced, but like even then, that doesn't matter, because even the stuff that's sourced by the CIA, people don't believe. And that's just like, at which point it's like, sometimes I'm just like, well, how do I just keep fighting the good fight? You know what I mean? It's like, you see how much money
they believe
you
in
like, to be a grifter.
Article that pops up online. Like, someone will just put anything into a headline. The USSR ate babies for 3 days straight in 1947. And they'll be like,
Hey,
wow,
that was Gonzalo.
what happened? And then you'll get like a multitude of sources that say that didn't happen. They actually fed the babies. And they'll be, no, I don't care about that source. The headline I read, and my 5th grade teacher said they ate the babies.
They straight up could say rap star Da Baby was worse than Stalin in 1919, and people will believe it. It's pretty crazy.
Dude, I can't even wrap my mind around like the American perception of Stalin, because I still can't understand what it is. Like, they'll say, it's Stalinism, but and then I'm like, what is how is that a different economic ideology from Leninist? Like, he literally didn't do a single thing different from Leninist ideology. It's not Stalinism.
But the difference is Lenin didn't live long enough to lead the USSR as a threat against the United States.
Yeah.
Stalin just happened to be general secretary, and because he led his people.
Whoa! Did you say general secretary? That implies that they were part of a central committee when he was a totalitarian
I'm sorry,
leader.
Dictator. Yeah.
Totalitarian.
I thought you were about to call me out. I was like, shit, was that not what he's called? But anyway, you know what I was saying?
I was making jokes how like Americans don't know what the central committee was.
You're very smart. So I was like, shit, what did I say? Well, what was I going to say? Stalin led his people, like I was saying, through an extinction level event, through a war for their existence as a people. We did not go through that. We simply, again, and you just look at the casualty numbers.
It's like also
Americans,
simultaneously
Soviets.
Simultaneously that and push them through an industrial revolution on X10 speed, plus eliminated all famines in a country that had been rife with famines for 6,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I say that all the time.
Also, like, that's what I always don't understand about the whole Holodomor thing, is like, it's the last famine. What was the argument, that it was intentionally targeted to only be in Ukraine, which is where they grew all the food? That doesn't make sense. That literally, also, like, if the numbers were accurate, it implies that Ukraine as a whole had 6 times the population of the rest of the USSR, according to polls done by Tsar Nicholas pre-revolution. It's just, none of it holds up to any academic criticism, but the moment you try to analyze it, people get like, oh, wow, denying the Holodomor, wow.
Red fascist snaky. Red fascist snaky.
Exactly.
It's just so ridiculous.
And then there you go. That's why you get into this conversation where people are talking about Stalin somehow being worse than Hitler. And again, it's because, going back to the beginning of our conversation. Yeah, Stalin and Mao were worse than Hitler.
I don't know anything about
because the United States was never really enemies with the Reich or fascism.
Yeah,
we simply fought to dethrone England and France from the throne.
Non-aggression pact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Americans have this like internal desire to defend Nazis when it comes to addressing who beat them. Like, well, actually, Stalin had a non-aggression pact. Well, Stalin was the last to sign a non-aggression pact, and it was initiated by the Nazis. No. He signed America never signed a non-aggression pact. It's like, who got America and the UK to get involved in the war efforts? Common sense. They just had good values. No, it was Stalin. Right? It's like, you don't understand that, like, IBM and like these American and British companies were funding the Nazis because that's where the money was, because obviously fascism is on the side of profits and anti, like, proletarian rights.
Right.
Super
Exactly.
profits, yeah.
I said this in the last episode. But again, people just don't conceptualize the scales of the conflict. Why World War II isn't called World War II in Russia and former Soviets, called the Great Patriotic War, because Operation Barbarossa was the largest invasion in human history.
Absolutely.
Period. Way bigger than anything that's ever happened on planet Earth. Fuck Normandy, fuck D-Day. Like, no, this was hundreds of times that
Also,
scale.
hot take.
Stalingrad
Normandy
alone is one of
failed.
the largest battles to have ever existed.
What was that hot take?
I said hot take, Normandy failed. Like,
Go off.
in terms of the cost of investment of troops, casualties, and military, like, investments, it accomplished nothing for the siege outside to show Allied powers coming from outside of the USSR. Like, it did not lead to the capture of Berlin. It led to mass civilian casualties and rapes of Allied forces. Like, all this stuff, like, it did not lead to the capture of Berlin. And the Axis powers were not even confronting it. This was like citizen militias being confused why armies were showing up outside their towns and being like, we better fight back. And then, of course, obviously, the Americans and the British dominated them. These are like random farmers with like World War I era rifles.
Right.
It was not the Nazis they were fighting against post-Normandy. The Nazis were fighting the Soviet storming of Berlin.
Yeah, I had a military history professor when I was younger in college who made that same assessment and argument, basically, and he was a colonel from the U.S. He was a retired colonel in the U.S. Army, and he made that assessment. And so many of these like history, like, you know, they would be. This was 20 years ago, so they'd be the equivalent of your you know, Rome stands today. They were just sitting there like going like, but you can't be. You're an American hero. You can't say this. And it was like, well, yeah, just the facts, and this is it. Like, they were so butthurt over, and they're like, you know, that your grandpa fought there, and that's nice, but you know, you can also, you know, look at the facts and disconnect yourself from it personally. Jesus Christ, you didn't do anything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's like also like a big part of nationalism is patriarchy, and like patriotism as a word is a root of the combination of patriarchy and nationalism. And America, boy, is it good at entrenching those in people in the modern age. Like, no country is saying a pledge of allegiance the way we are, and yet we're the beacon of freedom, not authoritarianism.
Yeah.
No.
Guys, I know we have 25% of the world's prison
Kim
population.
Jong-un.
I know we have a quarter of all
Chinese
prisoners.
They
social
saved the
credit
paintings.
score.
They saved the paintings instead of each other. Jeez.
Oh my god, the audio levels are going crazier now. No,
it's so bad. Even our communists can't get over the fucking patriotism.
No, they can't. Jesus Christ.
Oh yeah, this is why, like,
Jesus Christ.
the American leftist, by and large, is an anarchist. They cannot praise China or the DPRK or the Soviet Union, and it's motherfucker. You recognize that McCarthyism and the Red Scare exist, but like, you're not able to look past the current propaganda. It's like, then you are not like woke. You have not awoken at all. Like, you're just like a liberal.
And that's
like,
the thing,
you don't
is like
understand.
they have all of this, all that propaganda and all this information hand fed to them. They have it all, you know, by the imperial core, and they think they, you know, they're like some fucking kind of genius and shit. But no, it's just all, you're just a liberal that's just you just have that all catered to
Yeah.
you. So you think you're right one
That's
Google search away. You don't know how to search, so you just go with the first thing on Wikipedia.
yeah.
And,
It's like
and the crazy thing is too, speaking of Wikipedia, is that a lot of the propaganda, or I should say, a lot of the truth is only just below the surface. So, like with something like a page on the USSR, it's a little bit more contrarian. But like, if you look up Gaddafi, so going back to Gaddafi in Libya, like if you go, maybe not today, but I remember like 2 years ago, I was doing more research on Libya because I remember when the bombing destruction in Libya happened. And I didn't understand, obviously, as a kid. I was kind of like, oh, that's the news is interrupting my shows, fucking George Lopez or whatever I was watching. But if you go on Wikipedia, which is not an amazing source of information, but if you go on Wikipedia, it only takes like a couple of scrolls to be like, yeah, Gaddafi was evil. He was giving people money, having electricity, healthcare, and housing. We had to stop him. Like,
Evil
he
person.
sent foreign aid to southern Italy. Oh.
Have you guys seen that video of like where they're showing old apartments from like Eastern Germany, and they're like, yeah, they had a free home, and it's like
This
a
is
super
like-
nice apartment. It's like crazy. They make it seem super evil.
Yeah, no, this is what I was talking about earlier. It's like the home ownership rates, and they're like, yeah, but the home you owned wasn't even that good. It's like, bro, you pay $1,800 a month in rent. Shut the fuck up.
right.
For like
It's
a
like
closet.
it was capped at 3% in the Eastern Bloc in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
3% your monthly income. That was the limit of your rent. You pay $1,800. Do you make 97% of 1,800? I don't think so. Like, it's just so insane.
I wish.
Right? Yeah, I wish 1,800 was 3% of my monthly income.
Yeah.
Be like,
but like you were
also their
saying-
houses were maybe a little dirty. The apartments I rent, actually, maybe one cockroach week, maybe. No more. Really good.
I pay $1,800 a month, and I find mold all the time, and bugs, ants.
But I pay for it with my own labor, and that's communists don't understand that. Is that I don't know. I didn't read.
and that's the thing. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted you, but that's the thing, right? Like when we look at everything through retrospect and through, well, let me start off with saying this: that this country is dominated by white supremacy. We all know this, and it dominates all of our thoughts. Everything that we do, doesn't matter how decolonized you think you are. It doesn't matter if you're brown. You still have those seeds in you. So when we talk about the other, when we talk about China or Cuba or Vietnam or the Soviet Union, we continue to see things as an other and in a box as only one version of itself. So regardless if there were mistakes or crisis or protests or strikes or crimes, they are all incorporated as one entity. So I'll give you like an example. If the USSR, so Lenin gave a speech where he was basically like, hey, don't bother the Jews in our country. Like, just don't do that. But if some Soviet officer was an asshole in fucking, I don't know, some region of USSR, it was a massive place, and personally went out of his ways to make Jewish people's lives harder, his individual decision is now a reflection of the entire socialist experiment. Instead of conceptualizing that people are people, good and bad, it doesn't matter. They are all intrinsically bad. The experiment is bad. We cannot support it. That's how Americans think.
Yeah, so this is actually, like, in academia, this is the phenomena of, like, Orientalism, right? Communism, especially from the Western lens, is an Eastern thought. It is one of China, it is one of the USSR, or Russia, which until recently was seen as Asian, right? It's this concept of, like, Orientalism being the farther east they are, the more collective hive mind. It's the Asiatic horde, the propaganda that has existed since literally going back to ancient Rome, right? It's like the Huns, they fight to the last man. They have a collective sense of like fighting. They'll never back down. It's why we had to nuke Japan, according to America, right? They're never going to surrender. And it's this propaganda of Orientalism. And because of that, we don't see things as political events when they happen in Eastern countries. It's this mutated population collectively agreeing on evil because of the way their brains are genetically, right? That's the difference. Whereas America's hyper-individualist.
Right.
It's like we can't see anything as a collective action. We see BLM, what is like the mainstream media, but it's, yeah, some people got ahead of themselves. Some people got too violent. It's always individualistic. And that's the same reason it's like, I mean, it's like Marxists, as Marxists and materialists, we have to condemn the great man theory, that history is shaped by individuals and great people who lead men behind them because they are just better or more influential. It's not because of the Stalins or the Bonapartes or the Trumps or the Obamas. It's the material conditions that shaped someone to take that place.
Yeah.
And the American perspective and individualism as a whole cannot conceptualize this. It is because of a group of others, as you were saying, Ivan. It's a group of the Cubans, the Guatemalans. Che Guevara wasn't a revolutionary. He wasn't a consequence of material conditions. He was an individual manipulating Nicaraguans, Guatemalans, Cubans, and Argentinians. And that's why he had to be killed in Guatemala, right? And it's because of this great man theory. Or sorry, yeah, Bolivia.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, good point.
No.
Yeah. You understand what I'm saying. You understand my
Eddie,
point.
God damn it!
Yeah, I gotta go, guys. Sorry.
It's over. That was the end.
No, but
Turn in your ML card.
Exactly. Give up your CPUSA card. Go back to those anarchists.
I'll move back to Italy, guys. No more green card status.
But no, but like you were saying, it goes both ways, right? So when it comes to the Libyans and the 2011 intervention, war crime, as I like to call it.
Yeah,
it was
we like to call it civilian air squad killings.
Right, slaughter. It was a few select, pure of mind Libyans who stood up against their oppressive government, who also totally didn't get a bunch of money and totally weren't tied to the bourgeois class. They simply, those were the pures. So we have to come and cleanse them with our bombs. Like,
are you implying that American money didn't influence people to stand against free literacy programs?
Are you implying that our liberal savior Obama didn't?
Okay, so here's the thing. I always thought that like Libyans were based and did not want literacy programs or land reforms.
You can't teach the
Browns
to read.
Welcome Savior Obama.
The son of Africa. I will never.
Listen, guys, all we got to do is just put some money into Obama's charity foundation, and then he will fix Libya.
Please, third term.
Oh, blue, no matter who.
This time he's going to beat Trump and Biden's records for airstrikes.
When Homeboy tweeted that you could help the Libyan floods, it was you!
You did this!
I wonder how did that happen, though? We can only. I guess we'll have to.
I don't know who blew the levees.
We can only guess what happened
from inside the house.
I guess some levees failed or something.
Why ain't those dirty Browns just repair them?
Dude, it's like the Ben Shapiro quote. Jews like to build things. Arabs bomb shit and live in sewers.
Yeah.
No way he said that.
Oh, dude, this is like an old 2012 quote.
Yeah.
But it's like. Anytime, so he has this thing where he has this like page on like the Daily Wire where it's like everything he said that he no longer stands by. So that way you can't like checkmate him on anything he said. That's one of them. So someone mentioned it in like a live debate and he's like, yeah, so actually if you'll check my webpage, you'll see right there on dailywire.com that you'll actually see that I regret that. And it's like, bro, you still said that about a whole group of people that, like, the people you support are bombing every day.
Right.
It's like, I got, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like...
Like, you'd be able to backtrack on that if he was like, you know, I really thought about it and I actually do support Palestine. And then you'd be it's still kind of sketch, but like, okay, know what I mean?
Maybe you're coming around.
Absolutely.
We're very different people, Ben. Things I've said that I regret later in life. I love you.
Right. That's what I was saying. There's so many things I've said I regret.
Listen,
Nothing
Ben,
like that.
I will renounce communism if you will let your sister join Kollectiv. That's all I'm saying. And then we can make it a right-wing, conservative,
Please,
reactionary,
Abigail, we can
whatever.
fix you.
We can fix Abigail. I have faith.
Oh,
This is
definitely.
gonna be the episode my wife listens to.
Just give her a copy of the Communist Manifesto and.
Nah, just send her my number. I have a way with words, they say.
With words.
All right. Well,
You're
guys,
Italian. Wow.
I'm gonna. Yeah, that's true. Well, what you can say is that Italians are kind of like the Jews of Europe.
Jesus.
No, I'm just kidding. Well,
Oh my god,
guys. I'm sorry to end it here, but
no,
I gotta do some
this is
stuff
about the
tomorrow.
time you
And
normally
but I had a great job. Also, like, I'd love to maybe hop on another time or guest another time or just whatever, join in on if you guys do another recording or podcast. I'd love to be part of it. But I'm gonna call it for here.
Absolutely.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
I think,
thanks
I
for
think, just about 2 hours is good. No, thank you for coming on and spitting some fire. Is there any last thoughts that you have?
No, I mean, I guess basically America is the great Satan. I know the U.S. love to say that the USSR told all their citizens America was the great Satan as a way to rev up our population, but it is true. The U.S. is the great Satan. No other country has done as much damage internationally, nor domestically. Ronald Reagan is the devil, Obama's a murderer, and every president is a war criminal, and Eddy Pasta is out.
Wow, beautiful. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you, Eddie.
Stay beautiful, everybody.
Very well.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.